They took turns on her lashing. She begged for her life. Then a cowboy drove by. Clara had always known that life in the small frontier town of Dustwood was not easy. The town was surrounded by wide, rolling plains, dotted with cactus and dry shrubs, and a sun that seemed to hang in the sky longer than it should. The people who lived there were tough, hardened by years of working the land, taming horses, and enduring the harsh winds that swept across the open fields. Yet, despite its challenges, Dustwood had a quiet charm that Clara had grown to love. The wooden storefronts with swinging doors, the dusty streets where children ran barefoot, and the familiar faces that greeted each morning with a nod or a smile. Clara's home was small but sturdy, a simple wooden house with a tin roof that clattered when the wind blew. She had moved to Dustwood with her parents when she was just a little girl. Her father had been a carpenter, building doors, fences, and furniture for the townspeople, and her mother tended to a small garden behind the house. Clara spent her days helping them, fetching water from the well, tending the chickens, and learning the ways of the town. She was clever and quick, often solving small problems before anyone else even noticed them. People in Dustwood had come to trust her intelligence and her kindness, though they sometimes teased her for being too curious about everything. One warm morning, Clara stepped outside to fetch water from the well. The town was unusually quiet. Normally, the streets were filled with the sound of horses' hooves clattering on the dirt road, children laughing, and the distant calls of merchants selling their wares. But today, there was only the whisper of the wind. Clara felt a small shiver run down her spine, though she could not say why. Perhaps it was just the heat, or perhaps it was the feeling that something was different, something waiting just beyond the edge of town. As she filled the bucket, she noticed a group of riders approaching from the horizon. Dust clouds swirled around their horses' hooves, and their movements were steady, purposeful. Clara squinted against the bright sun and felt her stomach tighten. She did not recognize the riders, and the town had always been wary of strangers. Travelers often passed through, but most were merchants or families looking for a new place to settle. These riders seemed different. There was a tension in the way they moved, a quiet that suggested they carried more than just luggage. Curiosity overcame her nervousness, and Clara followed the riders at a safe distance, keeping behind crates and barrels near the town's general store. From her hiding spot, she could see that they were speaking quietly among themselves, pointing at buildings and nodding. One of them dismounted, a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat. Clara could not hear what he said, but the gestures were sharp, deliberate. Her heart raced as she realized that they were not here for trade. Her instinct told her to go back home, but Clara's curiosity was stronger than her fear. She crept closer, careful to stay hidden, moving from shadow to shadow. She wanted to understand what was happening. Was it a new family moving to town? Or was it something more serious, something that could affect everyone she had ever known? The tall rider led the others toward the center of town, stopping in front of the small saloon that had always been a place of laughter, music, and the occasional friendly argument. The riders spoke to someone standing at the entrance, a man Clara recognized as one of the town's younger workers, Sam. She had seen him around the blacksmith shop, always cheerful and quick with a joke. But today Sam's face was pale, and he nodded quickly to the riders, looking unsure. Clara crouched behind a stack of firewood, her heart pounding. She could not make out all the words, but it was clear that the riders had some kind of plan, and Sam was involved in it. Willingly or unwillingly, she did not know. Something about the way the riders moved and spoke gave her an uneasy feeling. They were organized, serious, and their expressions were unreadable. This was no ordinary visit. After a few moments, the riders left the saloon, moving back toward the horizon as quietly as they had arrived. Sam stayed behind, rubbing his forehead and muttering under his breath. Clara waited until the dust settled, then approached him cautiously. "Sam!" she called softly, making sure no one else could hear. "Is everything okay?" Sam jumped slightly, as if startled, and looked around before speaking. "Clara, I don't think you should be asking questions," he said, his voice low. "Some things are better left alone. You wouldn't understand." Clara frowned. "Try me. I might understand more than you think." Sam hesitated, then sighed. "Those riders, they're part of a gang that's been moving across the plains. They're looking for something. Or someone. I don't know exactly what, but Dustwood isn't supposed to be on their path. And now it is." Clara's eyes widened. "A gang? But why here? Why now?" Sam shook his head. "I don't know. And I don't want you to be involved, Clara. You're smart, but this is dangerous." Clara's curiosity flared. Danger had always been a part of life in Dustwood, but she had never felt it so close, so personal. She wanted to know more, to understand what was happening in her town. And though Sam warned her against it, she knew she could not just walk away. Over the next few days, Clara watched the town carefully. She noticed changes she had never paid attention to before. Windows were shuttered earlier in the evening. Merchants spoke in hushed tones, and children were called home before the sun began to set. The usual sense of calm in Dustwood was gone, replaced by a quiet tension that made every step feel heavier. Clara realized that the town she had loved, the place that had always felt safe despite its rough edges, was now under a shadow. Determined to understand, Clara began asking discreet questions, speaking to those she trusted, and listening more than she spoke. She learned that the gang had been causing trouble in other towns, threatening people, demanding money, and taking what they wanted. The thought of such people being so close made her stomach turn. She also discovered that the town's sheriff, a man named Henry, had been tracking the gang for months, but had recently gone on a supply trip, leaving the town temporarily without leadership. One afternoon, as Clara walked past the edge of town near the riverbank, she saw a figure in the distance. A lone cowboy riding slowly and scanning the town seemed almost out of place in the quiet. He carried himself with calm confidence, and Clara felt an unexplainable sense of hope. There was something about the way he moved that suggested he had seen the world and its dangers, and yet he seemed gentle and steady. For a moment, Clara felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps the town was not completely defenseless. Perhaps help was already on the way, even if she did not yet understand it. But as she turned to head home, she noticed movement behind the trees near the edge of the river. Shadows shifted, and a chill ran down her spine. The threat that had come to Dustwood was still very real. Clara knew that the days ahead would test her courage, her wits, and her understanding of the world she had always thought she knew. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Clara stood at the edge of the town, looking out over the plains. She could feel the wind on her face, carrying both the scent of wildflowers and the distant promise of trouble. And though fear fluttered in her chest, it was mingled with determination. Clara had always faced challenges in her life, and she would face this one too. Whatever was coming to Dustwood, she would be ready. Clara could not stop thinking about the strangers who had passed through Dustwood. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw their tall figures on horseback, moving slowly yet with purpose, and the way Sam had whispered about them being part of a gang made her stomach twist. The thought that her quiet town could suddenly be in danger was almost too much to bear. She tried to focus on her daily chores, but her mind kept wandering, imagining what might happen next. The next morning, Clara decided she could not stay passive. She needed to understand more about the strangers and why they had come. She slipped quietly out of her house before anyone else was awake, careful not to wake her parents or the chickens clucking in the yard. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light across the town. Dustwood seemed calm and peaceful again, almost as if the previous day's tension had been only in her imagination. But Clara knew better. She first went to the general store, where she found Sam restocking shelves. He looked up, startled when he saw her. "Clara," he said softly, glancing around the empty store. "You shouldn't be wandering about like this. You could be seen." "I need to know what's going on, Sam," Clara said firmly. "I can't just sit at home and wait. Something is happening, and I want to understand it." "You said they're part of a gang. What does that mean for Dustwood?" Sam hesitated. He seemed torn between protecting her and telling her the truth. "It means trouble, Clara. Big trouble. People have been warned to leave their doors locked, to stay quiet, to keep out of sight. I don't want you to get caught up in anything you don't have to." Clara's curiosity burned brighter. "I won't get caught, I promise. I'll be careful. Just tell me what you know." Sam sighed and leaned closer. "The gang moves from town to town. They're looking for something important, maybe money or information. I don't know exactly what. The sheriff has been tracking them for months, but he's away right now. Dustwood is unprotected. That's why I'm so worried." Clara listened intently, absorbing every word. She had always known that life in Dustwood was not without challenges, but the idea that the town could be unprepared for something serious shook her. She realized that she needed to be smart and alert in the days to come. Later that day, Clara wandered toward the outskirts of town. She wanted to see if she could find any clue of where the strangers had gone or what they were planning. The streets were quiet, as if the town itself were holding its breath. She passed the saloon and noticed that the doors were closed, shutters drawn. Usually there would be laughter and music spilling out, but today there was nothing. At the edge of town, Clara paused by the old mill. It was a place where she had spent many afternoons exploring as a child, imagining it was a fortress or a secret hideout. Today, it offered her a vantage point to watch the plains. She scanned the horizon, her eyes tracing the gentle rise and fall of the land. Somewhere beyond the hills, the strangers were moving. She could feel it. As she waited, a soft breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the faint sound of horses' hooves. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Could it be them returning? She ducked behind a pile of rocks, peering cautiously over the top, but it was not the strangers. It was a lone figure, riding slowly toward the town. The figure wore a wide-brimmed hat and rode with a calm, measured pace. Clara's heart lifted slightly. She had seen this cowboy before, the one at the riverbank. There was something reassuring about him. He seemed to notice the quiet tension in Dustwood, yet he did not hurry. Instead, he took his time, scanning the town as if reading it like a map. Clara watched him carefully, wondering who he was and why he had come. While she observed, she heard a small sound behind her, a branch snapping. She turned quickly, but there was nothing there except the wind. Still, she could not shake the feeling that she was being watched. The stories Sam had told her about the gang had planted a seed of worry in her mind. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow deeper. Determined not to let fear control her, Clara decided to explore a little closer to the center of town. She moved carefully along the back alleys, avoiding the main streets. As she turned a corner, she spotted a group of townsfolk huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces were tense, and Clara could sense the unease in their voices even before she could hear what they were saying. She crept closer, keeping low, and overheard snippets of their conversation. They were talking about the strangers, speculating where they might go next. Some suggested leaving town, others hoped the sheriff would return before anything happened. Clara realized that fear had spread through Dustwood almost as quickly as the news of the gang's arrival. The town she loved, usually lively and welcoming, was now gripped by uncertainty. Clara's thoughts returned to the cowboy. He had stayed at the edge of town, watching, perhaps waiting for something. She wondered if he might be someone who could help, someone who understood the dangers better than anyone else. The idea gave her a small spark of hope. Though she knew she could not rely entirely on someone else, she would have to be smart, careful, and ready for whatever might come. As the day passed, Clara continued her quiet observation. She noted the movements of people, how they avoided the main streets, how shopkeepers closed early, and how children were called home before dark. She began to form a plan in her mind, ways to stay safe, ways to warn others, ways to keep herself informed without drawing attention. Her mind worked quickly, analyzing the risks and thinking ahead. Clara had always been clever, and now her cleverness would be put to the test. Toward evening, the sky began to change. The sun sank lower, painting the horizon with shades of orange and pink, while shadows stretched across the town. Clara returned to her home, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that the days ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she could not hide forever. The town needed awareness, and she needed to be ready. After dinner, Clara sat on the porch of her house, watching the last light fade. The wind carried a soft rustle through the trees, and the distant hills were bathed in twilight. Somewhere out there, the strangers moved quietly, and the cowboy remained at the edge of town, a silent guardian of sorts. Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but she also felt a quiet confidence. She had faced challenges before, and she could face this one too. As darkness fell over Dustwood, Clara made a decision. She would continue to observe, to learn, and to prepare. She would not act recklessly, but she would not be passive either. Knowledge was her first line of defense, and she intended to use it wisely. That night, as Clara lay in bed, she could hear the distant sounds of the town settling, horses in the stables, the faint creak of doors, and the whisper of the wind across the plains. Sleep came slowly, her mind racing with thoughts of the strangers, the cowboy, and the uncertain days ahead. But for the first time since the strangers had arrived, she felt a sense of purpose. She would not be a mere bystander in the story that was unfolding in Dustwood. She would be alert, prepared, and ready to act when the moment came. Clara closed her eyes, letting the calm of the night wash over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new observations, and perhaps new opportunities. And when the time came, she would face whatever was coming with courage, cleverness, and the quiet determination that had always guided her. Dustwood was her home, and she would do everything she could to keep it safe. The following morning, Dustwood seemed quieter than ever. The usual hum of activity, the clip-clop of horses, the chatter of townsfolk, and the creak of wagon wheels was missing. Clara noticed the change immediately as she stepped outside. Even the sun, which normally seemed so bright and cheerful, looked pale and cautious behind the morning haze. She shivered slightly but told herself it was just the early chill in the air. Clara moved carefully through the streets, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main square. She wanted to see if the strangers had returned, or if the cowboy had moved closer. She kept her eyes alert, scanning every alley, every doorway, every rooftop she could glimpse from the dusty roads. Something about the stillness of the town made her heart beat faster. Clara had always been curious and brave, but she could not ignore the creeping sense of danger that now hung over Dustwood like a thick fog. As she walked past the general store, she spotted Sam again, arranging crates. He looked worried, his usual cheerful expression replaced with a serious frown. Clara approached him slowly, careful not to startle him. "Sam," she whispered, "have you seen anything unusual today?" Sam shook his head but glanced nervously toward the outskirts of town. "Not yet," he said. "But I don't like the silence. It feels... something is coming. I can feel it." Clara nodded. She understood that feeling. The town had always been unpredictable, but this was different. There was a sharpness in the air, a tension that seemed to cling to every building, every person, every tree. Clara's curiosity burned brighter. She had to know what was happening. She decided to explore the old mill again, the place where she had watched the planes the day before. As she walked, she noticed small details she had never seen before. Footprints in the dust leading toward the river, a broken fence post that had clearly been tampered with, and the faint smell of smoke from a distant campfire. Clara crouched behind a barrel near the edge of town and tried to trace the footprints. They were fresh. Someone had been there recently. Her mind raced. Could it be the strangers? Or was it someone else entirely? Clara knew she had to be careful. She had always been clever, and she understood that a single wrong move could put her in danger. But curiosity was stronger than fear. She needed to see for herself. Clara followed the footprints cautiously, moving along the edge of the riverbank. She kept low, stepping lightly on the soft earth. The sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the plains. She could hear the occasional bird call, but it seemed distant and muted, as if even nature were holding its breath. Now, after a while, she spotted something that made her stop in her tracks. A small group of people were gathered near the river, speaking quietly among themselves. Clara recognized them from the day before, the strangers she had seen approaching Dustwood. They were busy with ropes and bundles, seemingly preparing something. Clara crouched behind a large rock, holding her breath as she watched. Her heart pounded. She wanted to run back and tell the townsfolk, but she also knew that panic could cause more trouble than it solved. She needed a plan. She had to understand what they were doing before anyone acted. Clara's mind worked quickly, analyzing every movement, every gesture. As she observed, she noticed a man among them who seemed different from the others. He was shorter, older, and spoke softly, yet the others listened to him. Clara guessed he might be their leader. She watched him carefully, trying to understand his intentions. He pointed toward Dustwood, then at the bundles, and the others nodded. Whatever they were planning, it involved the town. Clara realized she had to act carefully. She could not let them see her, and she could not risk being caught. Her eyes scanned the area for a place to hide, and she found a small cluster of bushes near the riverbank. She ducked into them, holding her breath as the strangers continued their work. Suddenly, she heard a voice from behind. "Clara?" She froze. Turning slowly, she saw Sam, who had followed her quietly. His expression was a mix of relief and worry. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. "You shouldn't be out here alone." "I had to see," Clara replied. "I needed to understand what they're doing." Sam looked around nervously. "I know, but this is dangerous. If they see you, it could get serious." Clara nodded, understanding his concern. But she also knew that she could not turn back. She had to stay alert, to watch, and to think. The stranger's presence in Dustwood was no longer a distant threat. It was immediate, and she had a chance to learn more. For the next hour, Clara and Sam watched from their hiding place. They saw the strangers organize their bundles, check their horses, and move carefully along the riverbank. Clara noticed the way they communicated with subtle gestures, the way they seemed to anticipate each other's moves. She realized that they were experienced and skilled, which made her even more determined to stay hidden and gather information. As the sun climbed higher, Clara felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The situation was dangerous, but it was also an opportunity to learn. She began to make mental notes, planning how she might warn the townsfolk, or even find a way to slow the strangers down if necessary. She knew she had to be clever, careful, and patient. Suddenly, a shadow fell across their hiding spot. Clara looked up and saw the cowboy from the riverbank, standing a short distance away. He held his hands up slightly, not in a threatening way, but in a gesture to show he meant no harm. His calm presence was comforting, and Clara felt a sense of hope. The cowboy spoke quietly. "Clara, Sam, you need to be careful. They're planning something, but I'm here. Watch, stay quiet, and do not act recklessly." Clara nodded, grateful for his guidance. She realized that while she was clever, she was still young and inexperienced. The cowboy's experience and calm demeanor gave her reassurance. Together, the three of them remained hidden, observing the strangers from a safe distance. As the morning passed into afternoon, the strangers began to move again, heading toward the edge of town with their bundles. Clara noticed that they were not acting violently. They seemed cautious, almost secretive. She wondered what they could be carrying that required such careful attention. Whatever it was important, and it involved Dustwood in some way. Clara's mind worked quickly, trying to piece together the clues. She considered the layout of the town, the movements of the townsfolk, and the strangers' patterns. She realized that knowledge and observation were her greatest tools. If she could understand what the strangers wanted, she might find a way to help her town without putting anyone in danger. The sun began to sink, casting long shadows across the plains. Clara knew that the day's observations had given her valuable information, but there was still much she did not understand. She also knew that the strangers would not stay hidden forever, and that their plans would soon become clearer. As the cowboy led them back toward town, Clara felt a sense of determination. She had faced fear and uncertainty before, but this was different. The situation required patience, courage, and clever thinking. She had learned to stay alert, to observe quietly, and to plan her actions carefully. These skills would be tested in the days ahead, and Clara was ready. That evening, Clara returned home, her mind buzzing with everything she had seen. She helped her parents with the chores, but could not stop thinking about the strangers and their quiet movements near the river. She also thought about the cowboy who had arrived at just the right moment, guiding them with calm authority. She realized that while she had been clever, she had also been lucky, and sometimes luck was as important as skill. As night fell over Dustwood, Clara sat by the window looking out at the darkened streets. The town was quiet, but she knew it would not remain that way for long. The stranger's presence was a shadow over the town, and Clara understood that the coming days would test everyone's courage. She felt a mix of fear, curiosity, and determination. She had learned to stay alert, to observe, and to think. These skills would be essential in the days ahead. For the first time, Clara realized that being brave did not mean rushing into danger. It meant being clever, staying patient, and using every advantage she had. She would continue to watch, to learn, and to prepare. Dustwood was her home, and she was determined to protect it in any way she could. The morning sun rose over Dustwood, spilling golden light across the quiet streets. Clara woke early, as she had for the past few days, and felt a familiar mix of excitement and tension. The town was calm, but she knew better. Something was brewing beyond the horizon, and she needed to be ready. After helping her parents with the morning chores, Clara slipped outside and made her way toward the edge of town. The cowboy was already there, sitting on his horse, scanning the plains. His calm presence always gave her a sense of reassurance, and today she felt she could finally ask him questions. "Do you know what they want?" she asked quietly as she approached. The cowboy shook his head slowly. "Not yet," he said, "but I do know they're careful, and that means whatever it is, it's important. We need to stay patient and watch. Rushing into things will only make it harder to protect the town." Clara nodded, determined to learn everything she could. She followed him at a safe distance as he moved along the edge of town, his eyes scanning every detail, every shadow. They came to the old mill, and the cowboy dismounted. "Stay close but hidden," he said. "I'm going to see if I can get a better look without being noticed. You watch from there." Clara crouched behind a stack of crates, her heart racing. She had learned patience, but her curiosity burned. She kept her eyes on the stranger's path, waiting for any sign of movement. The town was silent, almost holding its breath along with her. Hours passed as Clara observed quietly. She noticed the strangers moving with careful precision, carrying bundles, speaking in low tones, and occasionally stopping to look around as if checking for watchers. Every movement seemed calculated, every step deliberate. Clara felt a mix of admiration and caution. These people were clever, and that meant she had to be clever too. Finally, the cowboy returned. He had watched from a distance and studied their movements carefully. "They're trying to move something through town without being seen," he said quietly. "If they succeed, it could cause confusion, maybe even panic. We need a plan, Clara. Do you trust me?" Clara nodded firmly. "I do." "What should we do?" The cowboy studied the town, considering the layout and the position of the strangers. "We need to create a distraction that will let us guide them away from the main streets. If they stay hidden, they could make the townsfolk anxious or scared. But if we control the situation carefully, no one will be hurt, and we can protect the town." Clara's mind worked quickly. She thought of the alleyways, the barns, and the open spaces at the edge of town. She suggested, "We could use the old barn near the river. It's isolated, and we could guide them there without anyone seeing. They'll be safe, and the town will stay calm." The cowboy smiled faintly. Clever thinking. "That could work, but it will require timing and careful coordination. Are you ready?" Clara nodded, determination shining in her eyes. She felt a rush of confidence. She had watched carefully, learned quickly, and now she had a plan. She would not let fear control her. Together with the cowboy, she could guide the strangers safely away and protect Dustwood. They moved quietly through the town, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the main streets. Clara's heart pounded, but she focused on every detail: the direction of the sun, the placement of barrels and crates, the sounds of footsteps in the distance. She had learned to be observant, and now her skills were being put to the test. When they reached a small clearing near the edge of town, the cowboy stopped and gestured for her to stay hidden. From there, they could see the strangers moving closer, still unaware that anyone was watching. Clara held her breath, feeling the tension tighten around her like a cord. Every second mattered. The strangers approached the clearing, moving cautiously. Clara noticed the careful way they handled the bundles. The way they paused to check their surroundings, it was clear that they were nervous, and that meant they could be guided without conflict if done carefully. The cowboy signaled to Clara, and she understood immediately. She crept quietly to a small pile of rocks near the clearing and picked up a few sticks. With careful precision, she arranged them to make a small, harmless noise, a subtle sound to catch the stranger's attention without startling them. As planned, the noise worked. One of the strangers glanced toward the sound, frowning. The cowboy nudged his horse and called out softly, directing their attention to the old barn near the river. The strangers hesitated, but the cowboy's calm authority reassured them. Slowly they began moving toward the barn, following the direction he subtly indicated. Clara watched carefully, heart pounding. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment where careful observation and clever thinking would protect the town. She noticed how the strangers reacted to the guidance, adjusting their movements with quiet cooperation. She realized that the situation was delicate, but with patience, it could succeed. As the strangers moved closer to the barn, Clara and the cowboy guided them skillfully, using small sounds, careful gestures, and the layout of the land to control the path. The sun climbed higher, casting light across the clearing, but the strangers remained focused on the barn, unaware of the observers guiding them. Finally, the last of the strangers entered the barn. Clara and the cowboy watched from a safe distance, feeling a wave of relief. The situation was resolved without conflict, and the town remained calm, unaware of the careful maneuvering that had just taken place. Clara felt a surge of pride. She had played a role in protecting Dustwood, using her intelligence, observation, and courage. The cowboy turned to her, his eyes calm and approving. "Well done, Clara," he said quietly. "You were clever, patient, and brave. Dustwood is safer today because of your quick thinking." Clara smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and accomplishment. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, and she had succeeded. She realized that courage was not about acting recklessly, but about thinking clearly, staying patient, and using every advantage wisely. As the day passed, Clara and the cowboy stayed near the barn, ensuring the strangers were safe and that no townsfolk stumbled upon them. They watched quietly, ready to intervene if necessary. But the strangers remained calm and cooperative. The town remained unaware of the delicate situation unfolding at its edge, and Clara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. By late afternoon, the strangers had finished their work in the barn and began moving back toward the open plains. Clara and the cowboy stayed hidden until they were safely out of sight. Then they returned to the town, their mission complete. Clara's heart was still racing, but she felt confident. She had learned valuable lessons about observation, patience, and courage, lessons that would stay with her long after the strangers had left. As night fell over Dustwood, Clara returned home, her mind buzzing with everything she had seen. She helped her parents with dinner, but her thoughts kept returning to the events of the day. She realized that intelligence and courage often worked together, and that fear could be managed with careful planning and quick thinking. The cowboy remained a quiet presence at the edge of town, watching over Dustwood from a distance. Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude for his guidance and wisdom. She knew that she had learned as much from him as she had from her own careful observation. Together they had protected the town without anyone being hurt or scared. As Clara lay in bed that night, she thought about the day's events. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and responsibility, and she had succeeded. The town remained safe, the strangers had moved on without causing harm, and she had proven to herself that cleverness and courage could make a real difference. She closed her eyes, feeling a quiet sense of pride and accomplishment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, But Clara knew she was ready. Dustwood was her home, and she was prepared to protect it, using her intelligence, patience, and courage. The wind whispered softly through the trees outside, carrying the distant sounds of horses and the open plains. Clara smiled, knowing that she had faced a critical moment and come through it safely. She had learned that even in the face of uncertainty, careful thinking and courage could guide her to the right path. And with that thought, she drifted into a peaceful sleep, ready for whatever the next day might bring. The next morning, Dustwood awoke to a calm that felt almost too perfect. The streets were quiet, the sun rising gently over the plains, and the town seemed to breathe again after the tension of the past days. Clara walked outside, her steps light but alert, taking in the familiar sights. The wooden houses, the little market stalls, the children running and laughing. Everything looked ordinary, yet Clara knew that ordinary could be deceptive. She had learned that life in Dustwood required careful attention, quick thinking, and courage. Clara's parents were already busy in the garden, tending to vegetables and flowers. She greeted them with a smile, though her mind was still focused on the events that had unfolded. She had watched, learned, and acted over the past few days, and she understood that the town's safety had depended on cleverness and careful observation, rather than sheer force. Her heart swelled with pride at how she had helped keep her home safe. As she walked through the streets, she noticed the townsfolk emerging from their houses, blinking in the morning light. Life was returning to its normal rhythm. Shopkeepers opened their doors, the blacksmith struck sparks from the anvil, and children ran freely in the streets without fear. Clara felt a deep sense of relief. Dustwood was safe. For now. Clara decided to visit the edge of town, where the old mill and riverbank lay. She wanted to see if she could catch a glimpse of the cowboy, the mysterious figure who had guided her and helped protect the town. As she walked, the wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. It reminded her of how close the town had come to danger, and how much careful thinking had mattered. By the riverbank, she saw him, standing quietly on a rise, watching over the plains. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face, but Clara could feel his calm presence even from a distance. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "Good morning," she called softly. The cowboy turned, a faint smile appearing on his face. "Good morning, Clara. The town looks peaceful today, doesn't it?" Clara nodded. "Yeah." "And a little bit, thanks to me, too." She felt proud, but tried to hide the nervous excitement in her voice. The cowboy chuckled. "You were clever, patient, and brave. You helped guide them safely without anyone being hurt or frightened. That takes courage, Clara, and more skill than most people have." Clara felt a warm glow of pride. She had faced uncertainty and fear, observed carefully, and acted wisely. She realized that courage wasn't about being the strongest or the fastest. It was about staying calm, thinking clearly, and doing what was right, even when it was hard. The cowboys studied the horizon for a moment. They won't be returning to Dustwood for a while. Their journey continues, and they've learned to respect towns like this, towns that have people who are clever and careful. "You've made a difference, Clara." Clara looked out over the plains, her heart swelling with hope. The sun rose higher, painting the fields with gold and warmth. She thought of the strangers who were no longer a threat, and of the quiet bravery of the townsfolk who had gone about their routines despite fear. She felt proud of her town and of herself. "Clara," the cowboy said softly, "remember this. Courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's standing up for yourself, sometimes it's protecting others, and sometimes it's being patient and smart. You've done all of these things."
Don't forget that. Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of understanding.
The past days had been filled with uncertainty, fear, and tension, but they had also been filled with learning, growth, and quiet triumph. She realized that even in the most ordinary places, ordinary people could do extraordinary things if they stayed observant, careful, and brave. As the day continued, Clara walked through the town, visiting neighbors and sharing gentle words of encouragement. She noticed how the townsfolk smiled more freely, their steps lighter, their conversations calmer. The tension that had gripped Dustwood for days was lifting, replaced by a sense of security and hope. Clara felt proud to see the positive effect of careful planning and quiet courage. She returned home for lunch, her parents smiling warmly at her. "You've been out early again?" her mother said.
Busy day? Clara nodded. Just checking on things.
"The town feels better today." Her father gave her a knowing look. "You've grown so much, Clara. Strong, clever, and brave. We're proud of you." Clara felt a warm glow. She realized that she had indeed grown, not just in courage, but in wisdom, patience, and confidence. She had learned how to face challenges without fear and how to guide others safely through uncertain times. In the afternoon, Clara decided to visit the old barn near the river, the place where the strangers had been guided. She wanted to see it one last time before everything returned to normal. As she approached, she noticed that the barn was quiet, peaceful, and untouched. It looked ordinary, but Clara knew the story it held, the story of cleverness, patience, and courage that had kept Dustwood safe. She paused for a moment, taking in the view of the plains beyond. The wind whispered softly through the grass, carrying a sense of calm and reassurance. Clara felt a deep connection to her town, her home, and the lessons she had learned. She understood that courage was not always loud or dramatic. It could be quiet, clever, and thoughtful, just like the actions she had taken over the past days. As she turned to leave, she noticed movement in the distance. The cowboy was riding slowly across the plains, his wide-brimmed hat tilted against the sun. He waved, and Clara waved back, feeling a mixture of gratitude and admiration. She knew that he would continue his journey, guiding and helping others in need, just as he had helped her and Dustwood. The sun began to set, casting warm colors across the town. Clara walked home slowly, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the strangers, the careful planning, the quiet courage of observing and acting wisely. She realized that she had grown stronger, braver, and smarter than she had ever imagined. That evening, the townsfolk gathered in the square for their usual social time. Children played, neighbors chatted, and the sound of laughter returned to Dustwood. Clara joined them, her heart light and happy. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that the town was safe and that she had played a part in protecting it. As night fell, Clara sat by her window, looking out over Dustwood. The town was peaceful, the stars twinkling above, and the gentle breeze whispered through the trees. She felt a sense of calm and accomplishment, knowing that the town was safe, the strangers had moved on, and she had learned important lessons about courage, patience, and clever thinking. Clara realized that life in Dustwood would continue, as it always had, with its challenges and joys. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever might come. She had grown, learned, and proven to herself that courage and intelligence could guide her through uncertainty. With a final glance at the peaceful town, Clara whispered softly to herself, "I can do this. I will be ready." She smiled, feeling a deep sense of hope and determination. Dustwood was her home, and she would protect it with wisdom, courage, and care. The night passed quietly, filled with the gentle sounds of the town settling into sleep. Clara drifted off with a calm heart, knowing that she had faced fear, uncertainty, and responsibility, and had emerged stronger.